All right, and we are back here on the GSMC Sports Podcast. And for the second part of the show, we are now going to take a look at the second half of the first round of the NFL Draft. So, went through all the non playoff teams. So, now let's get into the playoff teams. Now, the first pick here, it's the 19th pick, the Buccaneers. I was a little surprised by this pick. They took Emeka Ibuka from Ohio State. I was definitely surprised by that because I felt like defense was probably something that they would address. There's probably will still address it, but I thought receiver they were kind of set. I mean, they brought back Chris Godwin, you got Mike Evans, and Jalen McMillan. You know, he stepped up when they needed him to after Chris Godwin got hurt. So I thought they were kind of set there. But I guess Chris Godwin's not all the way back from his injury, and they want to have an insurance policy. And, obviously him and Mike Evans are getting older. So, you do want to have, some younger guys there. But, yeah, they went and did that. They went and drafted another receiver. They give Baker Mayfield another playmaker. Um, he finished with over 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns on 81 receptions his final year at Ohio State. I'm not really going to complain. It gives Baker Mayfield another weapon, but again, I felt like they could have addressed defense with that pick. The Broncos did address defense with their pick. They took Jahdae Barron, a corner from Texas. So now he lines up opposite of Patrick Surtain. So you know what? Look. I had the Broncos taking a running back. They didn't do that, but they could very well do that later in this draft. But they already, have a good defense, and they added to it by adding Barron. So I don't really have any complaints there. Then the Steelers picked, and in my mock draft I had them taking Jackson Dart, but Jackson Dart does get taken. We're gonna get to it, but I didn't feel good about it after I did the mock draft. I said, "Are the Steelers going to do that?" And then we were in when we were in our production meeting yesterday. We were talking about it, and Matt, who is a Steelers fan, who hosts the football podcast, was saying how that the national media talks about the Steelers taking a quarterback, but the local beat writers are saying, "Hey, they're going to take a defensive lineman," and I believe he had them taking the exact player that they ended up taking, and that was Derek Harmon, a defensive lineman out of Oregon. Now, I feel like maybe the Steelers could have also addressed the secondary. Maybe they could have used a corner. Um, but, yeah, they ended up taking a defensive lineman. Look, they got guys getting older on the defense. Cam Hayward's getting older, so I don't think it's a bad pick, but, again, I would have maybe, for them, maybe would have addressed you know, position in the secondary, but that's just me. But I don't really have any complaints with that pick. The next two picks I really like. So the Chargers, they took Omarion Hampton from North Carolina. They signed Najee Harris in the offseason. Last year they had J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards. Both of those guys are no longer on the team. J.K. was a free agent now, and they cut Gus Edwards. But you bring in Najee, and now you bring in Omarion Hampton, and he's coming off of a year. He had 1,660 rushing yards and 15 touchdowns in North Carolina. And now you go into a system where they love to run the football. And they could really have a balanced attack, with Justin Herbert now and, with that passing game, which I think Herbert's going to be even better, now year two in the system. With Lad McConkey, they brought back Mike Williams. I've said it all along. I'll say it one more time. Keenan Allen, go back to the Chargers. Complete it. Complete the return for both Mike Williams and Keenan Allen if he wants to go back there because he's still out there. But with that duo now of Hampton and Najee Harris, I think that's a better running back room than what they had last year. J.K. Dobbins did a nice job, but there's the injury history, and he did get hurt last year. So yeah, I like that for the Chargers. I would have liked to have seen them draft who the Packers ended up taking, or maybe take a receiver, and that could still happen. But the Packers, they did something that they have not done since 2002. they took a wide receiver. They took a wide receiver in the first round. And I actually did have them taking a receiver, but I had them taking Luther Burden. I had them taking him, but they ended up because I had Matthew Golden going elsewhere. I think I had it. Did I have him going to? I think I had him going to Dallas. Let me just look quickly at my my mock draft. So I had him going to. Oh no, I had Dallas taking Emeka Ibuka. I had Matthew Golden going to the Chargers. Yeah, so he ends up going to the Packers. Look, the Packers needed a number one wide receiver. We were waiting for their other receivers to, kind of step up. Someone take that next step. Whether it was Dobbs, Jaden Reed, Christian Watson, Dontavian Wicks, but no one ever really did. And when you go back and you watch the playoff game against the Eagles, I mean, well, also guys got hurt. A lot of guys got hurt in that game. But they need another threat to help Jordan Love. And, they were very good at running the football with Josh Jacobs, but they need to have a balanced offense. And you hope that Matthew Golden steps in and he kind of transforms that wide receiver room. Because they're going to be without Christian Watson to start the year. But, if this guy could take a stronghold on that wide receiver one role, that's going to make all the other receivers around it better. So I did like that pick for the Packers. And I was a little surprised because, again, they hadn't taken a receiver in the first round in a long time. But they did it. And how fitting is it because the draft is being done at Lambeau Field. The Vikings, they ended up taking Donovan Jackson, interior offensive lineman from Ohio State. Look, that was a problem for the Vikings last year, and you saw that on national TV twice in 2 weeks. With the Vikings losing to the Lions and the Rams. I mean, the offensive line really struggled, and they have addressed that in the offseason, signing some guys. But yeah, this is good. Add more depth to that offensive line. So I don't have a problem with that. And that was one of the Vikings' biggest weaknesses. And now you're going to have J.J. McCarthy being behind that line. You want to make sure that he is protected. All right, so now we get to the 25th pick. So that was originally going to be the Texans' pick, but the Giants ended up trading back into the first round. And you knew right then and there they're going to take a quarterback. And I was saying, as the draft was going last night, I'm like, as Shedeur Sanders was falling, I'm like, you know what? I think that the Giants should trade back in. And sure enough, they did. So the Texans traded the 25th pick to the Giants for the 34th overall pick, which is in the second round. The 99th pick, which is a third rounder, and a 2026 third round pick. So the Giants, they were on the clock. And I said, yeah, I mean, I would take Shedeur Sanders, right? But if you saw Joe Shane's son's social media, he posted something about Jackson Dart. So it was like a toss-up. It was like, it definitely could be one of the two. I said I'd take Shedeur, but the Giants ended up taking Jackson Dart. Another Ole Miss guy, just like Eli. Although the Giants didn't draft Eli, but, they traded for him. And, obviously we know what happened after that. The Phillip Rivers-Eli swap. But, yeah, they took Jackson Dart. And we're going to get into it more so in the next segment. But after that, well, as we were moving along in the draft, and once we got to the playoff teams, it was like, once we got past the Steelers, we're like, wow, Shedeur Sanders might not even get taken in the first round, and that's what ended up happening. Giants took Jackson Dart. I'm happy because the Giants got best player available, and they addressed the quarterback position. And Jackson Dart isn't going to start. We went from the Giants having a quarterback room of Daniel Jones, Drew Lock, and Tommy DeVito to now Russell Wilson, Jameis Winston, and Jackson Dart. I mean, I think that's good. Now, I haven't really gotten a chance to I'll get to hear what the Sports Talk Radio has to say about it here in the Northeast. Giants area. We'll hear, but it seems like not everybody is thrilled with the pick. But I mean, I'm not gonna say I'm like, oh man, we got the best quarterback ever. No, but they addressed the quarterback position and they got best player available. So I think the Giants did a good job last night, in my opinion. Obviously, now we got to see what happens when Jackson Dart takes the field. How does he look? But we're not going to have to worry just yet because he's going to be sitting. He's going to sit behind Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston. He's going to get to learn. And then when he's ready, he'll take over and hopefully he ends up being the guy. But looking at his stats from last year, 29 touchdowns, 6 picks, 4,200 yards passing. Let's hope he's the guy. Let's hope that Brian Dable and Joe Shane are still around and Brian Dable can develop him and he could be the quarterback of the future for the Giants. So to go through the last several picks here. So the Falcons, they actually traded back into the first round with the Rams. So there was another trade. Rams kind of fleeced, though. The Rams, they traded the 26th pick and a third-round pick to the Falcons for a seventh-round pick, and a first-rounder next year. So that was a good trade for the Rams. I liked that for them. But yeah, the Falcons traded back in and they took another defensive player. They took James Pierce Jr. from Tennessee. Again, defense was an issue for the Falcons last year. So, they addressed that with their first 2 picks. And then the Ravens, they got Malachi Starks, safety. I had them taking a corner, I believe, in my mock draft. So, look, secondary was a weakness for them last year, so I don't have a problem with that. The Lions took Tyleik Williams from Ohio State, a defensive lineman. I don't have a problem with that. I would have maybe addressed maybe linebacker, corner, but yeah, I don't have a problem with that. Commanders, they drafted Josh Connerly Jr., the tackle out of Oregon. Improve that offensive line. They traded for Laramie Tunsil. Now you have him to line up opposite of Laramie Tunsil. Got to protect your young quarterback. So I don't have a problem with that. The Bills took Maxwell Hairston, a corner out of Kentucky. To improve the defense, I don't have a problem with that. The Eagles and the Chiefs actually swapped picks. The Eagles moved up one spot. They took Jahad Campbell from Alabama, linebacker. He joins a loaded defense. I said the Eagles should go edge rusher, but I think they will at some point. And then the Chiefs took a tackle. They took Ohio State tackle Josh Simmons. Tackles were a weakness in that Super Bowl, so don't have a problem with that. But that's the first round. Rounds 2 through 3 are tonight. Let me know what you guys think, though, about how the first round went. What were your thoughts on it? What were some of your surprises overall? So before we go to break, I just want to remind you guys one final time here as the host of the GSMC Sports Podcast. To tip or donate and get your comments recognized, make sure to hit that super chat button in the chat if you want to see me acknowledge any thought or comment you may have throughout the live broadcast. Makes the show more lively, more entertaining. Between myself, the host, and you guys, the viewers, we appreciate your guys' viewership each and every day. So any contribution you can make to the show means the world to us as we put out content for you guys each and every day. And also, the other way to help out the show is by going to the link at the bottom of the show segment on the ticker, GSMCPodcast.net. That is GSMCPodcast.net. So when we come back from our next break, we will talk about who is still available and what can teams still address in the final 6 rounds of the draft. We still got a long way to go, but we will get into all of that when we come back from our next break. So with that being said, stick around, and we'll be right back here on the GSMC Sports Podcast.